Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get going in just a moment as everybody trickles in from the waiting room. Okay, seems like we can get going. Good afternoon or morning. Welcome to our virtual event focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in STEM. I am Ted Wells, and I'm Vice President of External Engagement at STEM Connector. For those of you who are new to STEM Connector, we are a national organization focused on supporting sustainable, impactful, and equity-focused employer support for STEM education and workforce development. Our members include employers, of course, as well as colleges and universities, cultural institutions, innovative non-governmental organizations, and public sector organizations who share this commitment and interest. I am pleased to introduce my colleague, Jessica Johnson, who has authored the report that provides the backdrop for this event. Jessica supports our research efforts at STEM Connector, and these insights aim to inform our members about the STEM talent landscape to support internal and external communication and decision-making efforts. She's a graduate of Tuskegee University, where she majored in animal science and also earned her master's in animal science from Iowa State University. She is incredibly passionate about this topic and has produced an excellent resource, and will be moderating a very engaging panel discussion after she shares the findings from her research. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ted, for the introduction. It's great to be here with all of you to discuss our report on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in STEM, as well as discuss some strategies with our wonderful panelists on how we can bridge the STEM talent gap. Now, before we begin our presentation, it's incredibly important for us to define DEIA so that we can have a common language for understanding. The following definitions are from the American Alliance of Museums. Diversity is all the ways that people are different and the same at the individual and group levels. Equity is the fair and just treatment of all members of a community. Inclusion is the intentional, ongoing effort to ensure that diverse individuals fully participate in all aspects of organizational work, including decision-making processes. And accessibility is giving equitable access to everyone along the continuum of human ability and experience. There are numerous acronyms that are related to this conversation surrounding DEIA, and there are various acronyms used throughout different organizations in the STEM ecosystem. This highlights our progressive understanding of these issues. Commonly, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is used throughout organizations, or even D&I, diversity and inclusion. And some organizations use DIB, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So what led us to create this report is that we noticed a struggle for sustainable DEIA. In 2020, the pandemic and racial justice movements led to a fundamental shift in the priorities of constituents across the STEM ecosystem. This pressured organizations to reevaluate and enhance their approach to DEIA. Organizations responded by collecting data, investing in programming, and holding their leaders accountable for centering DEIA in their organizations. This then led to increased commitments. In K through 12, we saw over $20 million spent towards diversity in public schools since 2020. In higher education, we saw increased positions and offices for diversity. And in 2021, we saw that over 80% of organizations took action on diversity initiatives. Yet there has been a stagnation of these efforts. Access to DEIA programs expanded sharply across corporate America in 2020 and 2021. However, in 2022, Glassdoor reviews of company benefits showed a stall in access to these programs. Additionally, tech layoffs in 2022 and 2023 disproportionately impacted marginalized communities and HR and diversity teams. HR and DEI practitioners also report having decreased access to resources, with only 34% of them reporting having enough resources to advance their efforts. And this causes a huge problem within the STEM ecosystem. And an impact of these stagnations of efforts is exclusion. To begin, social exclusion is painful, and it's the experience of being socially isolated, either physically or emotionally. Exclusion creates significant gaps in STEM talent and opportunities. Exclusionary practices result in a narrow talent pool that not only limits innovation and progress, but also reinforces systemic inequalities. According to research by Deloitte, diversity of thinking enhances innovation by approximately 20%. So it's really important for us to incorporate and support diverse perspectives. And here on my right, in a report from Wang and Lake, they say STEM is the foundation of all new scientific and technological insights. Scientific progress depends on people learning about new things and studying existing things in new ways. And having diverse people included means bringing different lenses, different experiences, different questions, different passions, and getting better results. So in order for us to bridge the STEM talent gap and ensure a sustainable STEM future, it's imperative that we address these with strategies. So at STEM Connector, we came up with 6 strategies to advance DEIA in STEM. The first is organizations should develop an understanding of DEIA to help facilitate conversations. It's important to have an organizational vocabulary, and it's important to incorporate belonging, which is the feeling of security and support when there's a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member of a certain group. It's also important to understand intersectionality, which is the complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination combine, overlap, or intersect, and their multiple effects on the same individuals or groups. Secondly, you should assess DEIA in your organization using an assessment tool such as an audit to determine your company's needs. Doing this will prevent diversity fatigue, which is stressing and exhausting diversity methods and efforts that are not aligned with the company. Methods such as quantitative assessment methods in employee surveys or student surveys, or qualitative assessment methods in interviews or focus groups are extremely important. And once an audit is conducted and data is available, organizations should use that data to identify problem areas. Third, organizations should establish DEIA leadership. Leadership has the responsibility of incorporating the DEIA strategy into the overall business strategy, leading the implementation of programs, measuring progress, and providing the resources that are needed to meet goals. Leadership also has the responsibility of engaging stakeholders, leading with the why, showing the return on investment, using data, demonstrating consequences of no DEIA strategy, and focusing on sustainable change. The fourth step is to create DEIA goals, and we encourage organizations to use the SMART goal method: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals. Specific goals will answer the questions who, what, where, which, and why. Measurable goals will answer the questions how much, how many, how will I know when the goal is accomplished. Attainable goals will answer how can this goal be accomplished. Relevant goals ask and answer if this goal seems worthwhile. And finally, time-bound goals answer when will this goal be achieved. The fifth step is to achieve DEIA goals. Regularly engaging with diverse communities and individuals allows feedback and new ideas and priorities to come to light. And achieving DEIA goals requires organizations to establish an infrastructure that supports DEIA over time. So it is important for organizations to implement policies, programs, and practices such as universal design principles, workplace flexibility policies, culturally responsive policies, consistent funding, having targeted outreach, establishing partnerships, implementing work-based learning opportunities or professional development, encouraging and resourcing affinity groups, and enforcing non-discrimination policies. And finally, organizations should continuously improve DEIA so that they prevent the stagnation of their efforts. And we encourage organizations to establish long-term roadmaps to measure sustainability. And now I'd like to turn it over to our lovely panelists who have taken the time today to speak about strategies that we can use in the STEM ecosystem to bridge the STEM talent gap. We have Wesley Combs, the principal of Combs Advisory Services. We have Cora Buckner, Senior Manager of Strategic Alliances and Talent Acquisition at Abbott. We have Dr. Cheryl Burkstaller, Founder and Executive Director of the University of Washington's Do It Center. And finally, we have Randy Irving, the Global Director of Strategic Inclusion at Nutrien. And now I'd like to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves and their connection to the webinar in the order that we see here on the screen, beginning with Wesley.
Hi, thank you, Jessica and STEM Connector for including me in today's presentation. My name is Wes Combs. My career has been focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility. I currently am an executive coach for individuals who are implementing these types of programs and have served as the head of diversity and inclusion at Boston Consulting Group, but also throughout my career have advised corporations on how to ensure that they deliver on their value proposition in this area.
Thank you, Wesley. And now I'd like Cora for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Cora Buckner, and I'm with Abbott. And my title is Strategic Alliances. And essentially what that means, a pleasure working with a variety of organizations, primarily HSIs and HBCUs, to really promote more equity and inclusion and also strengthen the pipeline of talent. As well as I'm also dabble in the placement area with our talent, early career talent in my organization. So very nice to be here. Great to be a partner with STEM Connector.
Thank you, Cora. And now Dr. Burkstaller, if you could introduce yourself, thank you.
Sure. I'm Cheryl Burkstaller here at the University of Washington in Seattle, and a very sunny day today. And I direct Accessible Technology Services. There are two groups, the IT accessibility team that focuses on the accessibility of IT to people with disabilities. So we focus on that. But then the Do It Center, disabilities, opportunities, internet networking, and technology. And so we provide advice to DEI efforts on our campus and elsewhere to make sure that people with disabilities are considered as a diversity group, but also within groups, building off of intersectionality issues. So if they're working with Black students, to make sure that Black students with disabilities are invited to events, but also those events are accessible to them.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And Randy.
Okay, Jessica and everybody, thank you for having me today. My name is Randy Irving. I'm the Global Director of Strategic Inclusion for Nutrien. I'm a co-director. I have another Global Strategic Inclusion Director, Lisa Mooney, that I lead these efforts with. We're charged for activating our diversity strategy for Nutrien as a whole, and we're one of the leading global agricultural chemical companies in the world. And we're really charged with trying to find great STEM talent across all of our business units across the country, well, really globally. So really interested in executing strategies to help us grow our diverse pipeline of STEM candidates.
Thank you, Randy. And thank you all for being here today to discuss strategies on bridging the STEM talent gap. Beginning with Cheryl, as the Director of Accessible Technology Services, and as you mentioned, the Founder and Executive Director of the Do It Center at the University of Washington, Can you speak to some of the key technological advancements and strategies that organizations can use to promote the success of people with disabilities in STEM?
Sure, I could talk about that a long time, but I'll give a couple of things to think about. And that is people with disabilities that say are in meetings like this one we're having right now. You can do things to make those meetings more inclusive. One would be if we were showing any PowerPoints to make sure that the content was spoken aloud, which it was in our opening session here. You don't have to read it word by word, but making sure all that content that's on the screen is made accessible by speaking it aloud. That reaches people who can't see the screen because of an environment they're in. They may be in the car and they're just listening, but also people who are blind. And so you don't have to know if a person with a disability is in the group in order to make it accessible. But this one too, you gave a good model of, which is large print, sans serif fonts, high contrast between the foreground and the background. And things like that to just be fully inclusive. Providing captions is a good idea as well. And so in online classes, some of those techniques can be used, but also looking at the accessibility of your documents. PDFs tend to be usually inaccessible, although they can be designed to be accessible. And so, think seriously about not including PDF documents, but using Word, or better yet, even as just HTML pages to deliver content. To make it accessible, particularly to people who are using screen readers because they're blind, and those readers need to see the content, and it has to be organized in a certain way, formatted, in order for them to really efficiently read that document. And so there are abundance of things, but the idea is to think about all the things you do, and when you use technology, who might not be able to access it, and how can you proactively design what you're doing to make it more accessible, and then also to offer accommodations to people with disabilities in your announcements and so forth.
Thank you, Cheryl. Those strategies were incredibly informative, and it gives us a lot to think about as well and implement for sure. My next question is for Cora. Given your role as the Senior Manager of Strategic Alliances and Talent Acquisition at Abbott, how do you approach ensuring DEIA in STEM recruitment and hiring processes? And what specific strategies have you found to be most effective?
Well, one strategy I found to be very effective is when you kind of blind the individual to who they're looking at, in the sense that really hiding things like sometimes even the name helps a lot, and you're looking strictly at skill. But a lot of times we can't do that. And I know a lot of people on the phone, on the call right now, probably do not have that luxury. But one of the things you really have to do, and this is for any recruiter, is look at what are the skills. When your managers come back and say, okay, this person doesn't fit because, really go back to the skills. Take out all the cultural fit, things of that nature, subjective terminology, and just look at the person objectively. That's the first step. And also, too, sometimes when you're looking at diverse talent, the value proposition of bringing in a diverse talent individual, what they're bringing to the table versus somebody who may not be from an underserved group. So I think that's probably the biggest sell and strategy you can use. But really, when you sit down, and a lot of that is educating your managers early on, the person who is going to be hiring. I think we do a very good job at that here. I mean, and going beyond, I know things that are really popular right now are bias training or unconscious bias training. And that's great. That's step one, but that's not the complete package. That's a great place to start. But then really in those one-on-one conversations and drilling down on skills, but not just skills, technical skills, also those unique things that sometimes an underrepresented person brings to the table that no one else would have. So that's kind of my long answer.
No, that's great. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Randy, my next question is for you. In your role as the Global Director of Strategic Inclusion at Nutrien, you have a track record and a proven track record as an equity and inclusion professional. Can you speak to some of the specific strategies that you have used to create a more inclusive environment for underrepresented groups in STEM? And specifically for you, Randy, how have these strategies improved retention or promoted career growth at Nutrien?
Okay, I'm going to use a couple of examples, and some of them will be from my previous life. I led the diversity efforts for the enterprise of FedEx, or for the FedEx enterprise, for about 4 to 5 years. And one of the biggest strategies that we've seen that has really helped people in coming to the company is one, the use of employee resource groups, and those employee resource groups giving new employees, especially in the STEM field, a welcome home. At FedEx, we housed our STEM people into what we called our all-gen ERG, and we call them business resource teams at FedEx. And so all-gen basically focused on people from all generations, but that's where we kind of housed our STEM students. And a couple of things that we did. One, for our intern program, for managers that had STEM students coming into the intern program, there was education. There was unconscious bias education for them. That was part of being part of the intern process. And then also we created where there was accountability and stake in the game for those leaders, for those team members to be successful. So they had to commit to hiring a certain amount of those interns, STEM interns, into their entry-level opportunities. And you couldn't participate in the intern program if you didn't have openings that were going to be available and you weren't willing to actually hire the students that came through the intern program. Another thing that we did that was really great, we put together, and this was for the interns to get them more engaged and also to make sure that the leaders were giving our interns meaningful value-added work as part of that. They all had to work together in a cohort on a project, and all of those projects were judged by our STEM executives. And that was something that created a lot of excitement around the intern program. It also gave them really something to look forward to towards the end of it, and they were able to see the fruits of their labor at the end. And another thing that was really, really instrumental as far as the ERG, as we started having interns that matriculated into full-time positions, we let those interns that had been there a year to 2 years be mentors to the ones that were coming on board. And we connected them with someone as soon as they came in. We connected them with one of the full-time entry-level people that came through the program the year before or 2 years before them. So they had someone that was close to them that they could connect to and that could help them acclimate to the professional world. But we also paired them with a mentor or a coach that had some tenure with the company too. And then also there were several points throughout the intern program where they had connection and opportunity to have some mentorship or lunch with some of the senior level executives, as well as the senior level executives coaching them as they're working on their projects. So all of those things working together, it really helped us create a pipeline where we were having a high retention rate of the interns. We were having a high onboarding rate from the interns into the entry level positions. And then we were seeing them career progress year after year. So all of those things together kind of worked in conjunction to get that program going. Also, another one of the great things I saw with our employee resource groups, and this was for one of our women-focused employee resource groups, with some of the development programs that we had. I remember right before I left FedEx, I was in one of their opening annual sessions where they were working on their strategies, and 3 women were able to share what their experience had been being a part of that employee resource group and how much it meant to them in feeling like they had a space where they belonged, feeling like they had a space where they could share their story, but also really appreciating the programming and the learning that we had for the participants of our ERGs. And all 3 of them had been promoted within the last month before that meeting. So those are some of the fruits of our labor and some of the things that we were really excited and proud of.
That's great to hear, Randy. And you also mentioned one of the things that you discussed really in depth was mentorship, which we will discuss a little bit more later in our conversation. So I'm really excited to hear you all's perspectives on that. And then my next question is for you, Wesley. You have a wealth of experience in promoting DEIA, both in your current roles and your previous roles that you mentioned in your introduction. Specifically, though, can you speak to the importance of inclusive marketing in promoting DEIA in STEM, particularly for the LGBTQ community? And how can organizations ensure that their recruitment, retention, and advancement strategies are inclusive of LGBTQ employees?
Sure. So I'll speak to the first part about the marketing element. For LGBTQ people, from the beginning, from the way in which they are looking at a potential employer, they want to see that they are represented throughout the experience that they have. So when it comes to any outreach that an employer might be doing to tell prospective talent that being in STEM as an LGBTQ person will be a place we want you to be, they're going to want to look to see how the company approaches their policies and procedures as it relates to providing equity and protections for LGBTQ people. The Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index is one barometer that ensures that a company has the right health benefits, inclusive approaches to how it does its insurance benefits, providing transgender health benefits, and also has demonstrated that they have a representation of LGBT people. So a company that is effective here showcases their LGBTQ employees on their website, on their career pages, and highlights especially those who are in high levels to say, if you come work here, you will be at a place that's in this company that's in leadership. So they have to show that they have demonstrated commitment to it by showing that their employees are at all levels of the organization. But terminology is critical. How the LGBTQ, people call it the alphabet soup, understanding what the different aspects of the community are. Language is critical. Using pronouns correctly, asking for an individual's pronouns prior to their becoming involved with any of your recruitment ensures that the recruiter is addressing the person the way they want to be addressed, and there's no guessing game. Also, self-identifying sexual orientation and gender identity up front. Most people will tell you that. So these are the things that help ensure that when an individual sees the marketing materials, whether it's from a university or whether it's from an employer, they see themselves there. Now, there is data to show that there's a survey that was done by GLSEN, the Gay and Lesbian Straight Education Network. It's a national LGBTQ organization that addresses safety of students in campuses. There was a climate survey that LGBT high school seniors whose STEM curriculum included positive LGBT content are twice as likely to choose a college major in those fields. So there's data to show this. But also employers must understand that there are barriers in the workplace for those who are in STEM roles who are LGBTQ. Another study in Science Advances concluded that LGBTQ plus professionals in STEM are 30% more likely to experience workplace harassment compared to their non-LGBTQ. So being aware that these barriers exist is critical, and then understanding how to address some of the things that Randy mentioned are critical to ensure that you're removing bias from all steps in the process, that you're tracking with employee surveys to see how individuals feel we have a question when I was at the Boston Consulting Group, do you expect to be here a year from now? That was a key question that we used when we looked at it from a demographic standpoint to see which demographic groups were more likely to say that. That told us we had a problem. And so we had to understand how to do that. So when it comes to the promotion of it, when it comes to the other aspect of recruiting, the same thing. Your people that are representing your company should be LGBTQ plus trained. They should understand terminology. They should look like the individuals that they're trying to recruit so that they can talk directly to the prospective talent to say, hey, what's it like to work here? Another program, I'll talk about it later, another question. So those are some of the things that exist. And it's important to also engage your own employees to have them tell you what it's like to work there, because they'll be very honest in telling you what's important.
Thank you, Wes. That was incredibly insightful. You shed a lot of light to many issues, some of which we did highlight into the report. So I really appreciate you bringing out those statistics and perspectives. I love statistics to talk about these issues. And now I'd like to move into our group questions, where these are more specific to each of our panelists' area of expertise, but if they feel comfortable, you all can feel free to answer them if you deem appropriate. My first question is directed towards you, Randy. In your experience, what are some of the common barriers that prevent organizations from effectively promoting DEIA in STEM, and how can that be addressed?
I think the first barrier is most companies never take the time to assess where they are on their DE&I journey and really understanding where they are as an organization, and doing that by their different business functions. So say here at Nutrien, we have 3 different business units, then we have a host of corporate functions. We've got potash mines, we've got our retail organization across North America, Latin America, and Australia. Then we've got our nitrogen and phosphate, which are chemical plants across North America and the globe as well. And each one of those organizations and business units has different STEM needs, different working cultures, and then they're all in different levels of their ED&I journey. So I think it's, one, understanding where you are, where your opportunities are, where your blind spots are, and then building your roadmap based on that and being very fact-driven and database and driven in that. I think the next thing is that we have to evolve our D&I strategies from charity to strategy. It can't be just the right thing to do. It has to be a business imperative. And we have to approach it and manage it like we would any other business strategy. And with any other business strategy, you're going to have accountabilities for that. And then lastly, I think we've got to be fact-based and systemic in our approach and figuring out how do we, based on where we are in our different maturity levels, how do we grow capacity with our people? How do we grow capacity with our processes and systems? And how do we make sure that we're being culturally competent or expanding upon our cultural competency as we grow as individuals and as an organization? Then some of the other misconceptions are that we're as diverse as where we are, or blinding ourselves to thinking that there is not diverse STEM talent out there. So that's one misconception. And then I think another misconception is most companies are very egocentric. We feel if we put a position out there or we find an organization that may focus on diverse STEM talent, just because we now start sending our positions to their job site or their board, that people will automatically come. I think that we have to build relationships with organizations that have diverse talent in STEM, but we have to really be committed and engaged in building that relationship and also building our brand within that diverse pool of talent, because the fact of the matter is we're in a workplace now or a working environment now where people have an opportunity to go and work wherever they would like, because it's such a tight labor market, if you will. So we've really got to promote who we are, what we stand for, what our core values are as an organization, and really give candidates an opportunity to know who we are and show that we're a company that's ready to have diverse talent. So I think those are some of the misconceptions and some of the ways to go about addressing those misconceptions.
Wonderful. And I appreciate that you mentioned that organizations should really show that they are an organization that is ready to host diverse talent and support diverse talent. That's an incredible point that you mentioned. My next question is directed at Cheryl. Again, the panelists can feel free to answer if you feel comfortable. But Cheryl, given the unique challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, how have organizations adapted their DEIA strategies to meet the needs of underrepresented groups in STEM in terms of virtual or remote work?
Well, post-secondary campuses like my own, but also industry, any worksite environment. We've all wrestled with moving things that we provide on site online. And some of the strategies we've developed to move online work actually better for people that are working remotely, and others do not. And it impacts people from a diverse talent pool. For instance, my specialty was with people with disabilities, as I've mentioned. And so some of the challenges there as we go from now everyone working online. I mentioned a little while earlier in the presentation, some of the online things that you should do in a presentation. But now one of our challenges and others is to go from online, not fully back to on-site, but the hybrid world. And some people, if we have a meeting where we're in person, but also there are some people zooming in, for example, that there's a lot of reporting that the people that are on Zoom kind of feel left out. And I feel this is on the responsibility of the facilitator to make sure that they're fully included. And so when I'm running a hybrid meeting, I make sure that I pay particular attention to calling on people that are in the hybrid world online. We just ran an event where we had a hybrid training program as a workshop. And it takes a lot of extra work to do that, to have hybrid. But whenever we have an online event, on-site event, we try to provide a hybrid version, understanding that it's not exactly the same thing. And so people were there on site, and we had to attend to their needs to make sure that they were accommodated if they had a disability and so forth, but also fully included. But then we had a separate team that was working on the technology piece, and they had to keep track of the questions that were going into Q&A or chat in their Zoom session. And so they would have to ask questions for them that were posing those questions. So as we move forward, I think a big challenge is to think about how to best serve staff members or even our communities that we reach out to in a hybrid world. And I'll say because it takes more staff to do it right, if you're going to do hybrid, it's expensive. And it's you don't want to do it wrong, and so forth. Some campuses like our own have developed some guidelines to give people tips on how to do that. And we have them posted on our Do It website on how to deliver an accessible online course. When we went so quickly online, and the most experience I have is with faculty, they're just throwing things up there, and things like having materials that are in a training program that are not formatted in the same way, where the navigation is not really efficient. Many people can have, and intuitive, I should say, and many people can have trouble navigating through a training program, for example. And often this impacts negatively for people who are from marginalized groups, like those who have disability. And so I'm going to stop there so we can go on to another question.
Well, that was a great answer, Cheryl. Thank you. And I appreciate how you highlighted at the University of Washington, you have two teams to address the hybrid events. And although you mentioned it might be more expensive, it's definitely worth it to have access for all communities to see whatever events are going on within your campus. That's really important. And my next question is for both Wesley and Cora. Mentorship and sponsorship are often cited as key factors in promoting career advancement for underrepresented groups in STEM. How can organizations create effective mentorship and sponsorship programs? And what are some of the benefits of these programs for both the mentor and the mentee?
I don't know who's supposed to go first, but I'll start with, I think it's also, before we have this conversation, I think it's important to understand the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, because a lot of people may not understand the difference, because how the programs are designed matter. But just a quick thing that, a mentor is a person who gives a protege or another, someone who else works in the organization advice, answers questions, helps strategize on what career step they might take. And it's, I often call it like a buddy, but it's very important buddies are important to have when you first come into an organization to understand the culture of the organization. But mentors help you, once you've gotten your foot on understanding what the unwritten rules are, help understand. The sponsor is someone who's actually promoting their career as they progress. So someone who is really highlighting an individual, giving them specific opportunities. So when it comes to the mentorship, it's important that the program is structured, that there's a training aspect to it, that the mentor and the mentee understand what their responsibilities are. Because if you come into people have different understandings of their roles, and it doesn't work unless people understand what the expectations are. And then, as Randy mentioned, cultural competency is critical in this scenario, because if the individual who's serving as the mentor doesn't truly understand what the whole person is, and if it's a Caucasian person working with an Asian American, there's just cultural nuances that impact how individuals show up in the workplace and how they make decisions. And so it's important that it's an intentional act of identifying people that should be mentored, they'll be successful. And then as you move through the process, ensuring that they have training on things like, unconscious bias, that they have the terminology necessary to speak to the individual. So from the standpoint that I look at it is, if the individual going into it doesn't really understand these nuances, the mentee is not going to trust the person and they're not going to really rely on them.
Yeah. And just to add to that also, Wes, that you brought up some really good points, but also you can't be transparent with your sponsor. You can be transparent with your mentor, because your sponsor is someone who's really going behind closed doors and promoting your career. Your mentor may be a peer, maybe one step above you, and you can't take the same approach. So you want to be aware of that as well. And I'm fortunate to work for a company that has a great mentoring program, a formalized program similar to Match.com, where you can go in and match out with your mentee or mentor, whichever way you are pursuing it. But also another component that I find when you look at this area, DEIA, really reverse mentoring is really critical as well. For executives, when you look at executives, a lot of executives, I mean, we're still in an environment where executives tend not to come from the groups we're addressing here today, DEIA. So really, I think it's a very good idea for organizations to look at, and I know a lot of us who are on this call or webinar can't go back to every executive. Maybe start out with a subset, 3 or 4 executives, find a group of folks that can reverse mentor those folks. Because a lot of people, they really want to do the right thing. They just don't like, and Wes, you said it beautifully earlier, and so did Randy. I think everybody said it beautifully throughout the day so far, that really a lot of times you have to educate and give people the opportunity to do the right thing and know the language, know what to say and not to say. And I think a lot of people right now, especially in our society, are scared to say the wrong thing, so they rather not do anything. So that's one option. Another option when it comes to mentoring is look at your, we call them affinity groups, employee networks, resource groups, whatever you want to call it. That's a great opportunity. The people who are in those groups tend to work with executives. They're almost always executive sponsored at some level, and they have the opportunity to get informal mentoring from those executives. Because a lot of times you're in a room, you're a manager, you're in a room with an EVP, who's guiding you along and coaching you along. And likewise, that prospective mentee is obligated to educate that person as well. So preparing our employee resource groups, no matter what group it is, take advantage of that opportunity, especially if you're in a leadership role in those organizations. You're not just there to promote yourself, you're there, we want to train those folks to also promote the culture and promote understanding.
There's one tool that when I was at both Accenture and BCG, we used a tool called GlobeSmart, which is made by Appian. I don't know if Appian was absorbed by anybody, but it's a tool that helps individuals understand how people from different cultural backgrounds and different regions of the world, how they hear information, how they are most effective when they're given feedback. And it's a very helpful tool. And we found this very helpful at both BCG and Accenture, because our workforce was so diverse. There were so many individuals that were all around the world. And when you're engaging with people, you don't understand small things that can really impact how a person shows up in the workplace. And so it helps better equip both individuals on how to do this. So it's a tool that was very effective when I was there.
Thank you both for your perspectives. Really insightful. And I appreciate you mentioning GlobeSmart, Wesley. That's an incredible tool. I've been able to take a look at that, and it's really helpful. A lot of organizations mention that it helps with their DEIA efforts. So my next question is for Cheryl and Randy. And Cheryl, you can feel free to answer first. In many STEM fields, there is a lack of representation for underrepresented groups at the leadership level. So how can organizations ensure that diversity and inclusion are integrated into their leadership development and succession planning efforts?
That's an excellent question, because we probably all know in this group that people with disabilities and other marginalized groups overall are being included more in employment and in academic programs as well. But many have not reached that point to be in leadership positions. Some can brush it off and say, well, it takes time to give opportunities. So I'd say be proactive in whatever environment you're in, and for particularly people with our underrepresented status, to think about ways to help them engage in leadership opportunities. I find working with people with disabilities, often they're just not asked to do something that would be in a leadership position. And so doing that, we run programs and do it where we give opportunities for teenagers and college students with disabilities to do things, be on panels, for example, to share their experiences and helping them how to do that effectively, and paying them, by the way. But I think, that would be good to just for, supervisors that, looking around and just making sure to do things proactively, even looking at the employee training materials, maybe the onboarding materials that you might have for, which we do here at the university in our organization, for future employees, but current employees, to refer to what resources are available. For example, look through the wording of that in other publications. Are you saying things in there that might make a person from a diverse group realize that that's a really important value? Do you say that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are important values, and why? And that, we really encourage, people from underrepresented groups to fully participate in whatever. And then, of course, in professional development for all staff, to promote, inclusion and deal with issues regarding inclusion. I noticed one thing with my son, who's 30 years old and has obviously a younger generation than I am in, and everyone in probably this meeting, most anyway. And he thinks nothing of having it. I mean, he doesn't, it's not worth commenting about that his supervisor is a woman or a man. He works at Amazon. And so we need to, because he grew up when diversity was being supported. So we need to keep working in that direction, but also work with people that haven't been part of that generation, that can learn more about how people from various groups can contribute. And so just including that in everything that we do. We just talked about mentoring, having an online community that you might want to say it's a mentoring community. We do have some online mentoring communities where students with disabilities and mentors are in the same group, but it's a group mentoring. Some people are more comfortable with that. And then they can talk back and forth, talk about some of the issues they're facing in the employment arena, and support one another, and they can meet one another. Besides the one-on-one mentoring where they meet one person, but they meet other people that are in the community that might be new employees or people that have been there a long time, and then recruit your supervisors to be in that community, and kind of, again, working with people with disabilities, people who are underrepresented minorities, et cetera, to help them get leadership opportunities so they can work into supervisory positions.
I did want to add to Cheryl's comment as well. Her very good insight. But another thing too is encourage your executives who are maybe mid-career, a little bit older, who grew up in an era where it wasn't okay to talk about a disability, to come forward and say, yes, I have an insulin pump, or yes, I have this, whatever it is, disability, and things that will encourage other employees to say, yes, a lot of times there are people in leadership who are disabled and none of us know because it's not a visible disability. So I think that letting them know, yes, promote it, put it on do a story on them on social media, so everybody can see it, or your internal social media, or so everybody can see that person has a disability and this is a warm, welcoming place, and they've excelled at the top of leadership. Another thing, and this is a little bit biased because I am in early careers, really start to feed the pipeline. The more we feed the pipeline early now, the less we'll have this conversation, because I hope in 20 years we're not having discussions like this anymore, because it's just kind of like Cheryl's son. It's just ingrained in the DNA of organizations and who we are. It's never going to go away altogether. I think that's unrealistic. But if we start to feed the pipeline, there'll be more and more people who aren't what we expect to see in the corporate world, the business world, the academic world, what have you. So that's the key. When you look at your organization, and I know everybody says there's not enough talent. No, there's not, but go after your fair share. For those of us who are on this webinar, let's all commit to go after our own fair share, so our organizations won't have this problem. It'll be everybody else's problem.
I had two things I'd like to add to this conversation. I think one, from a mentorship standpoint, I think I've seen reverse mentorship have some success in this space, in helping people understand things from a different standpoint than they look at it. And it also helps give us a view for the younger talent that's coming in, and what are they interested in, and what means something to them. And 3 points that I try to focus with leaders on is I call it acting inclusively. And I think it's being accepting, meeting people where they are and taking the time to understand people and where they are and what their journey has been, being contemplative as a leader, looking at the way that you lead and is it effective? You know, are there things that you can do to be better, to connect and engage with people better? And then lastly, being transformative in the way that you do things, you know, not only being accepting of change, but leaning into change and pushing against the status quo.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Randy. And I love how these last few questions really facilitated a dialogue amongst all of us here on this call, and especially those here in the audience as well. Another question that I have is implicit bias. It can often influence hiring and promotion decisions, again, particularly for underrepresented groups in STEM. So how can organizations train their employees to recognize and address bias? And what are some effective strategies for promoting fair and equitable decision-making processes?
This is something that when I was head of diversity at the Boston Consulting Group, this was a focus of our work. We, you know, at BCG, and I think all organizations that rely on data for their decisions as it relates to DEIA are those that are most effective, because they're making their decisions based on facts, not judgments and assumptions. And that's one of the biggest challenges. Along that line also is that I believe also that it's important that the person who's in charge of the diversity initiative at an organization should report to the business and not report to HR. Because when you're trying to implement something like unconscious bias, the people who have to receive the training, and this includes the senior leadership, have to believe that this is something that is required, because it's just as important as ethics training, or it's just as important as financial, competency training. And so if they understand that it's important and it's built into their performance plans that to eliminate bias, that's going to help make the program more successful. So what we did is we looked at the data to see which groups of individuals from different demographic groups were making it through different steps of the talent life cycle. What pool of individuals was available when we went on a campus, how many of those individuals were given offers, how many people, when they were given offers, then were promoted at different steps. And so when you look at the data, you get to see if different groups are being treated differently and what's the cause. And one of the things we recognize, at least the way we were doing things, is that the process was very fast. We had consultants that went to a workplace, and they to a campus, and they did all these interviews, and they had to make these decisions very quickly, and it was snap judgment kind of things. And so one of the key things from unconscious bias training is slow down the process. Make sure that when you're making a decision that you're making it based on a fact and not an assumption, and allow others to question that in the process. So it helped by helping the individuals who were doing the recruiting see that bias was possible and see and understand what bias was. I don't like the term unconscious bias, because it makes people think that they have a problem all the way when they start. So they're going into it thinking, oh, you're going to tell me I'm a bad person. And if you've ever done the implicit association tests that Harvard offers online, it's a little shocking when you think that you're really very inclusive yourself, and you take one on another demographic group that's not what you are, you realize that everyone has bias. And so the key thing is recognizing that we have it, so that we understand how to change the way we make decisions is the effective course. And so it changed the way decisions were made, and it helped all people, especially the people that were evaluating people, understand how they might be making judgments. I'll tell you a quick story. We had an Asian employee who was from Nepal, and there was one of the key things that makes a consultant successful was their ability to speak out loud to a client and show and demonstrate that they add value. But when there was a male partner in the room, this woman was tended not to speak. And in Nepal, it's disrespectful to speak when there's an elder male in the room. And recognize that said, we actually helped GlobeSmart have part of this. And so the partner in charge then had to have a conversation with this employee to help them understand that speaking, while it may be a violation of their own cultural norm, was not going to be, it was not, they needed to understand how it impacted their career. And so two sides of it, we had to have the manager recognize that maybe the reason is that she wasn't speaking often in certain meetings was maybe because of this. So it was a two-sided thing. So that's how unconscious bias training helped us.
Thank you, Wesley. And Cora, do you have any perspectives on implicit bias, and how can organizations train their employees, to recognize and address bias? And what are some strategies for promoting equitable decision making?
Okay, I'm going to piggyback a little bit on Wes's comments as well, because once after you get past the training and really help people to understand we're not trying to get you in trouble, but or out of trouble. This is just training, like any other training. I think you have to level set it like any other training. This is business training. This is not HR training, and I sit in HR, but I think that's the first step. But the second step, I think there should be more follow-up after unconscious bias training. Well, do a survey and be honest and be willing to accept the feedback, because some employees are going to come back and tell you this was a total waste of time. Most organizations, too bad, you should have, you weren't listening. Don't blame the messenger. Go back and do something with that information. Maybe it is, maybe this is a very self-aware person. Just assume that, but go back but don't just survey them once. Go back and survey them in 3 months and say, how did this affect your decision making on a daily basis, on a review basis, on a interview basis, etc., and see how it changed. And then go back again in 6 months and see what the impact is. And don't just do the training once. Maybe have a video or something you send periodically to back up and reinforce the training. Because I think the average person in the world of work right now in the US is about 45 years old. It's a very good chance that our ideas, and most of us on this call are that or older, we're pretty entrenched in some of the things we think, for good or bad. I'm not saying we're right or wrong, but you're not going to change somebody overnight, and we don't want to drill people. They're free to think what they want. But the ideal is to create better outcomes for organizations here. And I think the more we reinforce the idea that maybe, and then after a while, maybe people will start to think, well, maybe I am looking at the world a little different, or maybe there is another side to this. So that's kind of my input on how to change that bias thinking, the lack of self-awareness. I hate to even use the word bias. It's a lack of self-awareness training.
One thing that Cora mentioned, something that's really important. Data is a key thing here. If you look 6 months or a year from now, how did our recruiting numbers change? Did the performance change on individuals? So use data because it's all there. And for people who tend to think that they don't need this, when they see the data, it tends to help them realize, well, I might not need it, but I see the problem. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And I like the idea of repetition as well. That's critical.
Absolutely.
I think it's a good idea sometimes, depending on the group too, to focus on behavior. They may have a bias. Hopefully you make them more aware of that. But it's not so, we would like to change people's attitudes, of course, but it's not so much the bias, it's the decision making that's impacted by that bias. And the things that they choose to do as far as training, but also your resources and statements you have in a job promotion and so forth. And then it becomes less personal, I think.
That's absolutely right. And I appreciate you all mentioning going back to strategies and seeing what has improved over time. That kind of ties into the strategy 6, continuously improve your DEIA efforts.
Mhm.
I know that we're coming on time. So as we come to the end of our webinar, STEM Connector would like to extend our heartfelt thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights and experiences with us. We would also like to thank the audience for joining us today. And we hope that you gained some valuable insights and strategies so that you can promote DEIA in STEM within your organizations. Thank you again, panelists, for your time today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.